1 in 3 women will be the victim of domestic violence in the United States, and I'm a dad of 3 daughters. This is an unacceptable statistic, and over the last 10 years, being a board member of domestic violence services of Benton and Franklin counties, I've learned a few more that I want to share with you, and this one is shocking. The age range of 18 to 24 is more likely for our young women to be the victim of intimate partner abuse than any other. It starts much earlier than we thought. And so, as a dad and a member of this domestic violence services community, I realized that I had a personal need to be able to message this to my daughters. Last year, my oldest daughter, Sophia, was 11. She came home from school all excited, and she told me that something wonderful happened. Daddy, something so great happened. I want to share it with you. And I said, great, tell me, what is it? And she said, I've got a boyfriend. I'm so excited. He's so nice. And I said, what? But what I wanted to say, because I almost went full Rocco. Rocco is my real name. I almost said, 11 years old, what are you kidding me? You're too young, Maron. But I didn't say that, but she still said to me, oh, Dad, it's fine. All we do is we walk down the hall together, we have lunch together, it's really sweet. I still wasn't fully on board, but okay. A couple weeks later, she came home in tears and said, Dad, something terrible's happened. Well, what happened? What happened? I was in school, some of the boys found out I have a boyfriend, and they called me a slut. What does that even mean? And I want to let you know that I asked Sophia permission to share this story before I did. This starts much earlier than we thought. So I work hard to teach my girls in a way that's meaningful to them and let them know that this kind of thing is going to happen. People, boys, and also girls are going to say things to you. They're going to call you a bitch, a slut, or a whore. Tough words for a tough talk. They might poke you or punch you or hit you or prod you. This is the reality. But there's more, so I want to share a little bit more with you and with them, what I shared with them about what the other parts of this profile are, what an abuser is. Now, there is no one. They're all different. They're as varied as anybody. And overwhelmingly, they're men, 9 out of 10. That's in line with national averages, but also what we're seeing here locally in our own shelters and through our own support systems. This also happens women on men. It does happen, and we do see it here as well. But again, a profile is overwhelmingly men. They also don't seem to be leering or odd in any way. There's no outward sign that would let you know. They seem normal. Even more so, they actually seem charming or clever. They have a personality that draws you in, leading to the all too common conversation that we have is that, wow, I had no idea anything was wrong. You seem so perfect. Everything always seemed so perfect. Again, there's innumerable kinds of abuse that happen. They tend to fall into these 5 categories. Emotional abuse, hurting a pet, breaking things, mind games. Sometimes we call that gaslighting. There's also verbal, calling names. Some of that charming lexicon I shared with you earlier when I talked to my daughter, Sophia. Technological, a little device we keep in our pocket. We spend all our time on Facebook or other social media. GPS tracking, Facebook sabotage or other social media sabotage. Reaching out electronically over a wide distance to maintain control and disruption in your life. Sexual, forcing sex. Sometimes it happens awake or asleep. Using religion or dogma as a method of that control. Physical, of course. Punching, choking, hitting, killing. So this is the scariest one for me. I'll never forget this day. I'll never forget seeing him come at my mother with his hands like this. And me intervening, me standing in between them, physically protecting my mother. But the other thing I'll never forget is the seed that it planted inside me that I'm afraid was going to take root, because you see, domestic violence is about cycles and cycles. And we know that young men who witness this at home have a higher probability of furthering it. And I wanted to make sure that that wouldn't be me, that I would stand up and that I would take the action to break the cycle. And we're going to talk a little more here about how actions are necessary to break these cycles. So like I said, cycles within cycles, there tends to be a buildup of tension that then releases in an explosion in, again, innumerable potential ways, but largely in those 5 major categories that I shared with you. Then after the explosion, there's a honeymoon phase. My God, I'm so sorry. You made me so angry. I had no control. I need to get back my control somehow the abuser has no responsibility in this process. So I ask myself, how do I stay out of cycles? Because it is important that I break this cycle on a day-to-day basis. So how do I do it? I remain vigilant. So I could tell you a story about my second daughter, Giovanna. We call her JoJo. 2 weeks ago, she came home from school, forgot about the rules of finishing homework and doing her chores, and went straight to her screen. She wanted to see something cool. And I said to her, "JoJo, hey, come on, you got to do your chores and your homework, you know it." After what seemed like the 47 millionth time telling her, I said, "Hey, come on, I told you to do your chores. We all have to pull our weight around here. How many times do I have to tell you?" Taken aback, she scuttled off and did it. But I realized that hurt look in her face. I realized that I'd made a mistake. I let her finish what she was doing. I grabbed her up, put her on my lap, and said, "You know the rules. You know you're supposed to finish your chores. You know what you did was wrong. But what I did was the greater wrong." You see, I fell below my standard of leadership in that moment, and I lost my message in my method. But a more important cycle I wanted to make sure never had a chance to break. The next piece I wanted to make sure never took root was that she would imprint and normalize that a man who loves her shouts at her. And that's important, that never takes root. It's important because just like a young man who sees this happen in his life and has a higher propensity to perpetuate the cycle, a young girl or a woman who sees it also has a higher odds of being in it. And I wanted to make sure there would never be any normalizing of this behavior in her life. So as I said, after 10 years of being in the domestic violence services, we've pivoted tremendously across the DV landscape from purely reactive services, which are important and we still offer, sheltering, advocacy, and protection. We've helped hundreds and thousands of people around the Tri-Cities. And honestly, we work to put ourselves out of business. We wish that we lived in a world where we were unnecessary. We could just spend our time doing other things that are more fun. But in the last 3 to 5 years, there's been a real pivot, a real shift to proactive services, to exploring the root causes, to understanding the underlying reasons why this happens. We don't have an answer yet, we're still working, but we found some of the common roots, and I don't suppose these will be too surprising. I talked to a friend a couple weeks ago at a party. She's a doctor, she works in helping sexual assault and eating disorders. And after a few minutes of talking, we realized that domestic violence is a root cause of both of those. Substance abuse, post-traumatic stress disorder. Again, not every single one, but a strong correlation. There are common roots. So as we seek the roots to DV, working together and sharing this word and message is important, that the good people working in these other areas search outside their silos, because the cycles are broader than we think. Another piece I found about the profile that surprised me was this. The abuser has a stronger need for control than his capacity for love. So that leads me to probably one of the toughest roots that will be to try to uproot this, is getting men talking about love. This could be really hard. As a man, this is something that I have no experience in. I just learned it through my daughters and through my wife. So I asked my wife to help me to be my love coach and suggest some books that I could read so we could talk about it. And she suggested a few. And one of the ones we got to is my favorite book, which might surprise you, is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Now, you can read the quote, but I'll tell you the lead up to the story. He was working with a client. He's an executive coach at this time, and he's working with an executive, and the guy's telling him that, "Hey, I just don't love my wife anymore. The connection is gone. I just don't feel it." Stephen says, "Yeah, but do you love your wife?" And he says, "Well, of course I love my wife, but I just don't feel it." And Stephen says, "No, my friend, you don't understand what I'm saying. Love is a verb. The fruit of that love, the feeling, right, that comes from it. So if you want to love her, you need to take action. You need to listen to her. You need to sacrifice, empathize, appreciate, and affirm. Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to take action? Are you willing to change your thoughts, your words, and your actions?" Thinking about Emily's awesome talk earlier today about learning with our 5 senses reminded me of how I became fluent in German living in Europe for 5 years. I also mimicked sounds and ate a lot, probably drank a beer too many. But it was a beautiful time. And I remember the day that I woke up and I was thinking in German and speaking rather than thinking in English, translating and then speaking. And I noticed that my actions were different. My work was different. And so this really drove it home to me that there really does need to be a continuing from thought through words to action. And so as I look deeper, being a TED nerd, and I'm sure lots of you are too, or else you wouldn't be here, right? I looked at some TED Talks. So here's a couple that I invite you to check out because they're fantastic. Violence Against Women is a Men's Issue by Jackson Katz. He says it so beautifully and succinctly that we talk about the women being abused, but not the men abusing the women, right? We talk about Mary getting beaten by Paul, not Paul beats Mary. And that dumbing down and passivization of that sentence eventually works out to the statistic where Mary is a battered woman and Paul is gone. There's no one who ever did it to her. Taking it further, we think about girls getting pregnant, but not the boys impregnating. This goes deeper than we thought. Another good one, A Better Way to Talk About Love by Mandy Len Catron. She talks about the metaphors that we use for love are overwhelmingly negative and violent. We fall in love. We're crushed by love. We're smitten from smite, something God can do and wipe us out. We're sick, or we're crazy in love, as she put by the great philosopher Beyonce Knowles. Okay? So, can we think differently about love? Can we think about love as something that we build, something that we grow, something that we layer on? Or, as she put it, and I thought it was beautiful, as an art of expression, something that's evolving and growing. So I've got one more daughter and one more story I want to share before I wrap up. This is Antonetta. We call her Little Tony. She picked this flower for me. She says, because I love you, Daddy, we're swimming, and I got this. She's a pumpkin. She's below this demographic, but I am afraid for what's coming for her, and I hope that the strength that I show her and that what her mom shows her and her sisters show her positively imprint. But although this is her too, okay? She's fierce and won't be victimized. She's strong because she respects herself. She sees the respect that I share for her mother and for her sisters, and that exudes out from her. And so this ability to love has to start in our self-love, and I believe that starts with a level of self-respect. So to wrap this up, violence happens in cycles, where love is a growth. And if, as we're searching for the root cause of this in an organization and all the ills that we're trying to fight, mimics anything like the tangential circle I found trying to reach my center, then perhaps we break this cycle. To do it, we're going to have to grow. Thank you.